Hello everyone, and welcome back to the new profile series. At this point, I've done 8 total runs. A couple of those were just real short ones to get a couple characters set up. Otherwise, the rest of them were the couple of starting ones required for quests, and the rest were just for farming some AP and crystals to unlock and upgrade my mind crystals and my mind upgrade levels. So at this point, I'm on level 15, which allows me to have 3 slots open, which is what I would recommend getting to early on. You can also go up to a lot higher level. Upgrading your level early on isn't something that's too expensive, but personally I went for upgrading my crystals themselves instead of upgrading my mind levels. One thing to mention in regards to that is that you will unlock Blooming Vigor from the quest line pretty early on. If what you're looking for is more HP, then leveling up this shard is much more efficient than leveling up the levels themselves in terms of how much HP you get out of them. You get very little HP out of each mind upgrade level compared to the HP that you get from this. So also, one of the main topics of today's video is going to be mind crystals. Mind crystals are something that I find to be very misleading for a new player especially. Honestly, even for veteran players, it's one of the things in the game where if you aren't paying close attention to how a lot of the game mechanics work, the game itself never explains any of the stuff to you, so it's very easy to miss. The first thing I want to talk about are healing mind crystals. I find them to be very underpowered in their current state of me making this video. Maybe it's something that will get changed eventually, but I kinda doubt it. A couple of them have gotten buffed, but not enough to make them more useful in my opinion. So the thing that is misleading here is that in basically any game, if you see that something recovers 30% of your HP, you would expect that to be 30% of your total health bar. In this game, it doesn't work like that. You'll end up having like 250, 300, sometimes even higher than 300% HP in total. So what that means, to provide a simple example, is if something heals me for 100%, and I have 300% HP, that's not a full health heal. It's a 1/3 heal instead. And that makes a lot of these healing mind crystals look very misleading. You'll see something in here that heals for like 90%, and it will seem much stronger than it actually is. Also, in regards to healing mind crystals, I find mixture replenishment and mixture enhancement to be just statistically the best option, in my opinion. You're getting 3 extra mixtures, and then each of those mixtures is healing for an extra 80%. Now notice this says an extra 80%. I don't know what the base healing of a mixture is, but it's already very high. So you will have these mixtures healing you to full health or close to full health, even when you're reaching those very high HP values of something like 300%. Another thing to talk about is damage mind crystals, which are the other thing that I find to be a bit misleading in terms of their actual power. So here you can see that The attack damage is increased by 10%, it goes up to 30% when maxed. This game has a system where every time you take a potential, you actually get a 20% damage boost to your overall character, and a 20% damage boost to moves of that potential type. So a 30% damage in a Mind Crystal slot isn't something that's nearly as significant as it sounds like it would be. You'll end up with very high damage modifiers just off of getting potentials during your run alone. So, to put that into perspective, this would give 30% at max, and that would equal 2 potentials, already dealing more damage than having a Mind Crystal slot taken up by this. Now, if you do stack a lot of damage potentials on top of each other, they can add up, but overall, I feel like they're way weaker than they look like, and I don't generally tend to use them too often, unless I'm trying to really do stuff where I'm damage min-maxing, or I'm speedrunning, that type of thing. There is one exception when it comes to damage options, and those are Acceleration and Bloodthirst. These both have a very high damage modifier when they're maxed out. The issue with these is that they're very difficult to use, even for seasoned players, because anytime you ever take a hit, you lose your kill streak and combo count. Also, there are a lot of sections where your combo count is kind of forced to fall off, just because of a boss like going through different phase rotations, or just times where you're not able to hit a boss or an enemy for some reason. So those are some things to keep in mind when looking at the Mind Crystal system. For those reasons, my recommended and used Mind Crystals always lean heavily towards utility options, like getting a discount at the shops. This goes up to 90% discount. This happens at every single shop you visit, and it works with shop rerolls when you start getting those from your entropy settings. So a Mind Crystal like this is extremely ridiculous in how many extra upgrades for your Evo type you can get out of it. If you get a free, like, 1 or 2 potentials, it's already basically doing more than damaging thing would do. Also, in terms of discount, it scales really well with the mixture replenishment and mixture enhancement setup, because you can get free mixtures throughout your run, so it scales in value with these as well. Other really good options are potential risk discovery. This might not be something that's as useful as you're very new to the game, because you're not going to know which potentials you want and which ones you don't want. But as you start to learn those types of things, potential discovery really helps you get your consistent builds every time, or just avoid some of the potentials you really don't want to take. Other really good options are chance boost crystals, for that same reason. They just help you kind of bypass some of the RNG of the game. If there's a certain type of element that you really know you like, you can go ahead and pick up one of these, and that will help out a lot with that. So, I consider things that are utility in order to get the most consistent runs as possible, to be the strongest, in my opinion. I really just like breaking the nature of a roguelike game and making my runs very consistent by taking things like potential discovery and chance boost to always get the same type of upgrades and tactics that I want to have. That is just my opinion on the whole Mind Crystal system. I encourage people to play around with other ways to play with it too. Like, If you really just want to make a really tanky character or a really tanky build for some reason, or not for some reason, but if you just really want to try and make a tanky build, take stuff like HP, stack all the healing modifiers on top of each other. The healing modifiers will probably add up over time, even though I find them to be a little underwhelming on their own. If you want to go full damage, try out that. Like I said, if you're stacking a lot of the damage or healing on top of each other, it will probably add up, but just a couple of them on their own I don't feel like are really impactful enough compared to how much just... I can't put a value on breaking the RNG of a very RNG-natured game. So that will always be the thing that I value the most. But with Mind Crystals, what you need to figure out is what you value the most. If you're really struggling with taking too much damage and losing your runs that way, focus on more healing things. If you feel like you're doing way too low of DPS and you're not taking a lot of damage, you can stack damage things. It's up to you how you want to play the game and how you want to set up your Mind Crystals. Now, I will recommend a couple of starting crystals to help you learn the game as you're progressing through the early stages. These three are all ones you get very early on. They either just through very easy quests. You start with the HP mixture amount. You get the recovery just by using 5 of them during your runs. And then you get the HP crystal by doing your story quests. These will give you a lot of survivability when it comes to practicing your runs. And I think that's one of the most valuable things you can have, in my opinion. If you're always just constantly dying, then you don't really have a whole lot of time to practice. Especially if you're going into a boss and you're just dying right away before you can really even look at their patterns. So I think having that extra amount of survivability helps out a lot. Also, the next major thing that we'll be talking about is the difficulty system in this game and why you might want to start increasing difficulty. There's the normal mode, which you start with, and as soon as you beat a run on normal mode, you unlock hard mode. Then, with how hard mode works is that you need to win runs at a certain limit to keep increasing your entropy value. So, for example, if I start trying to increase stuff too high, it'll tell me I need to win at over 20 to increase my quota again. I don't know if it matters like how much over 20 you go, or if it's just a flat amount. So that I'm not sure of. But I usually just try to max it out anyways, if I'm trying to get my entropy system maxed. It's up to you, though. This is another thing where you want to progress it at a rate of where you feel comfortable, where you enjoy it, and where you feel like you can learn. Like I said, with taking survivability stuff in Mind Crystals, I feel like the more you give yourself a chance of actually practicing stuff, the more practice you can get out of it. Rather than just going into a super hard difficulty, dying to a boss in a couple seconds, and then you don't really learn anything that way, in my opinion. Some people like really punishing stuff like that, and some people don't. So it's going to be another thing where it's going to be based on your opinion and what you want out of the game. Okay, so a couple reasons of why you would want to start increasing difficulty outside of just making the game more difficult for yourself. There's a lot of stuff on this menu. In the top left here, we have buffs that you get from reaching certain thresholds. So, for example, once we reach 25 here, we will Let me think of how I want to increase this. These aren't really things I want to be increasing right now, but that one's probably the easiest. It's worth a lot of points, and this is another weird thing where the game just doesn't give you good information. It says exchange space item prices are increased, but it doesn't actually affect things like tactics, MP upgrades, potentials. It only affects things like buffs, I believe. I'm not as sure on buffs, but it affects, it affects your mixtures and your debuff removals. Those two I know for sure, and I know for sure that it doesn't affect potentials, it doesn't affect tactics, it doesn't affect ascensions. The only one I'm not sure on is buffs. So this is a very easy way to get 6 points for yourself. The ones that you really need to be thinking about are standard enemies have more HP, standard enemies deal more damage, and the battle phase has a time limit. The more you start to raise these, more so the HP and the time limit, the more you're going to start to hit like a meta wall, in my opinion, where you really have to start thinking about, am I taking tactics that give me enough damage? Am I taking potentials that give me enough damage? Because what'll end up happening is that standard enemies aren't too bad when it comes to their HP, even when maxed out, but bosses are where you're going to get gate kept a lot of the time, where either you're not doing enough damage, so they end up chipping you down over time, and you die that way, or you die to running out of a time limit. Another thing to explain is that if you look at the top here, you have where it says Elite Enemy, and then these two icons. This is their HP and their damage. When it says Elite Enemy, it means the bosses at the end of each phase. These are increased based on your entropy amount. So at 26, they have 26% increased health and damage. This really scales heavily over time, to where when you start getting into the high entropy stuff, it becomes like it's less so of the skill of executing the run well, aside from you do want to take a lot less damage, obviously, but it becomes a lot more so about just knowing how to get the most damage out of your character through tactics, potentials, or both. I'm honestly really enjoying playing on low entropy again because of that fact. I did like all my stuff on high entropy for a long time, and it's nice just to be able to take whatever potentials I want, whatever tactics I want, and not have to think about that min-maxing. So, as we progress, I will show some high entropy stuff, but I might be dipping down back to low entropy later on, or lower entropy, when I do like a character showcase for each character. So anyways, back to the buffs, you can see them here on the left side. You can see where they unlock. I think the big ones, in my opinion, are getting more exchange points from exchange spaces, and then shop refreshes. Shop refreshes are extremely powerful if you have enough money to spend on them, because it gives you a whole nother list of upgrades you can take. You can get a lot of upgrades out of shops this way. One other thing to mention is that these buffs do start to stack after you start bypassing the 45 range. It's another thing that the game does not do a good job of notifying you about or explaining. So, for example, this one will eventually go to 400 instead of 200, and then this one will increase, and so forth. And that works the same way. It's like an incremental thing when you hit specific entropy values. Next thing to look at is output here. I talked about it a little bit in the first video, but you have a chance to get these mind fragments anytime you kill a boss. It's not guaranteed, but there's no limit on character or boss. You can always use the same character, you can always farm the same boss. It's just a chance to get them. This chance increases the higher that you raise your entropy value. And you also get more exchange points. Exchange points are not exchange points, it's called AP, I don't actually know what it stands for. It's the currency to unlock your mind crystals. I don't notice like a huge difference this way, but it is something that does help, and it does add up over the course of the run. Also, over here, we have the high-quality tactics chance. The higher you go in entropy, the more you will start to see purple tier tactics show up, and yellow tier, or gold tier tactics show up. So that's another benefit. It's, again, not really a big deal in my opinion, but it is something. Also, I have to say that the Sortisho buffs are also something that's pretty good. The Legacy Tactic refreshes are good, but I find that the 40 and 45 aren't nearly as good as the rest. You get 2 extra battle spaces and 2 extra potential spaces, but the thing is that those bonus spaces have to go in place of something else. So you're always still going to have the same amount of stages. So in hard mode, it's 10 stages per area. So you go through 10 separate levels, you fight a boss, you go through the next 10, you fight a boss, etc. So these don't actually give you more... these don't allow you to get more upgrades total over the course of the run. They just give you more options where you would have potential spaces or advanced battle spaces. So they are okay. It's just, if you're like struggling, they're not something that's nearly as useful to get as they sound. One more thing, I want to come back to mind crystals for just a second. I know I've been talking for quite a while, but we'll wrap this up soon. The More the Merrier is another one that I recommend getting immediately and upgrading immediately. I put this on right away in order to get my mind crystals leveled up to 3, and one of them's still at 2, but the other 2 I got to 3 in just a matter of a couple runs. Same with upgrading your mind levels. And I would recommend keeping this on for as long as possible. The only reason I'm not using it in this run is because I do want to stay at mind level 3 for now, and I want to show off these 3 in particular, and just try to show off how good the extra survivability is of these 3 put together. So, if you're just playing casually, I would recommend having this one on. If you're hitting a point where you're starting to struggle a bit with the difficulty, you could switch that out for some of these. Or you could just as easily wait until mind level 20 in order to start pushing your levels. That way, or pushing your difficulty settings up. That way you have this on with those other 3. Otherwise, it's just something to think about. Today, I think I will go ahead and do a Maya run. We're going to run with 2 legacy characters that do not have any tactics on them. And the reason being that is that I know how to make a lot stronger legacy characters, so if you see that, these all have really meta tactics, and Well, except for this one. These all have very strong tactics and very strong setups. So I'm gonna go ahead and go with ones that don't have strong tactics, to kind of make it more similar to what a new player would actually be playing at this point. By the way, if you look at the bottom of the screen, there's a button called Change Palette. It's right trigger for me, but based on what controls you're using, it might be different. 2 is going to be locked. It's another mode that you will unlock later on. And then 3 is part of the Rachel DLC. 1 and 4 should automatically be unlocked, and this allows you to change the color scheme. Color 3, which is... Did I say Rachel or Hazama DLC? Now I'm questioning myself. But anyways, I don't know which one I said, but 3 is part of the Rachel DLC. It does also change your skill effect colors. I'm gonna run with 4, though. I do believe that Hazama will also be coming with a color scheme, but it will only be for certain characters, whereas with Rachel's color scheme, it applies to all characters. So if you look down at the bottom left, well, I'm always getting interrupted when I play this game by the just constant amount of stuff that pops up. So for this build with Mai, I'm going to be looking for Airborne Attack and Ayane Shiki. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but whatever. And that is where I was talking about having stuff like potential refreshes would really come in handy in your Mind Crystals. You get up to +6 refreshes when you have that Mind Crystal maxed out, which is absolutely insane in terms of how much it helps you get your specific potentials that you like to play around put together. Okay, so if you look down in the bottom left real quick at my HP bar, you can see what I was talking about at the beginning. I'm at 208% HP. So if I get like a 30% HP, it's not a lot based on the 200% total. That's just to kind of re-explain what I meant by the healing value stuff not being as valuable as it looks on paper. Also, one thing I want to talk about is that I have tried to fix controller noises as much as I can, playing around with OBS settings and playing around with my setup, but in the end, a lot of it is just limitations of my current setup. So, based on a little bit of testing I did, they were picking up a lot less, but they were still picking up. We'll see how it ends up in this video. Eventually, maybe long-term, I would try to get some more recording equipment, but right now it's just not really a viable option for my channel. So here is one of the main benefits I was talking about with increasing your entropy values. You see I have a ton of money saved up right now, but there's not really anything I like in the shop. However, I have a shop refresh, which does cost money, by the way, and that money does increase based on how many times you refresh it, but it is a very good way of getting either just more upgrades by because you can stack these. You can buy a potential, refresh the shop, and then buy a second potential, which is really huge. And then also, just if you're not getting the rewards out of shops you want, it's a good way of refreshing the shop. And then this plays along with the other benefit you get of getting more exchange points for clearing these exchange rooms. That is one of the other entropy benefits. There was much more of a divide in the past because of this, where if you wanted to get characters with a high amount of potentials or like HP or MP upgrades, you really had to go into this kind of really high entropy setup at 75, where you had 2 shop refreshes and you gained the most money out of rooms, and you also had like things like extra Sorticho refreshes, or Sorticho rewards, so you could get 3 different things out of the Sorticho, that type of thing. But one thing I've noticed in doing these low entropy runs is that it is much easier than it used to be when it comes to getting things like high potential characters, high MP or HP characters. That is because of that they've made a major change to the way that rooms show up and some other stuff when it comes to playing these mind challenge or mind. Now I don't remember. Another thing we're going to be looking for in this My build is Thousand Spears, if it shows up. Thousand Spears is one of her best potentials in general. But anyways, what I was saying is that it gets very confusing because there's Mind Training, which is this mode, I believe. There's Mind Challenges, which is a bossing mode. And then there's Mind Trials, which are also a bossing mode, but it's more of a boss rush. But anyways, it gets very confusing sometimes when it comes to talking about names of stuff, because they're all very similar. Another thing that I would recommend looking into for Mai are her dash potentials. I can actually show them real quick. It's kind of awkward the way that you upgrade them, because you have to upgrade the airborne and grounded version separately for some reason. I guess they just really wanted to pad out her potentials. Even then, she has the least potentials in the game. But anyways, it lets you to dash twice in a row. In this case, it's in the air. But the second dash will deal damage, and you can also angle it downwards. When you get this fully upgraded, all of your dashes will deal damage and be able to be angled. So she becomes very mobile when you have that. I'm going to be preferring to go into a little bit different build, though, unless we end up getting a lot of potentials. So one thing you're going to notice immediately as you start progressing into hard mode is that the bosses are a lot more aggressive. And some of them have either new attacks or just stronger version of their current attacks. Or of their original attacks, I mean. So that is something you might struggle with a lot when you first go into hard mode. Even if you're playing hard mode at 0 settings and not increasing anything, it still gets pretty significantly more hard to kill these bosses compared to easy mode. But I think that's something that I would recommend trying to get used to. If you're really just having a hard time of it, you can go back to easy mode. Otherwise, if you're doing sort of okay against them at least, I would recommend getting used to their hard mode versions before you get too much muscle memory built up of easy mode. But that's going to be up to you as well. So I have a lot of good options in this one. Thousand Spears with the MP version here gives you permanent invincibility. It is a very, very strong tool for Mai. Similarly, her Ayane Shiki with dash combo also gives you dodge frames on those attacks, so it's something I find real useful for her. And then this up attack is also very nice, and it scales with the aerial attacks that I have already. Especially as I upgrade that one once more. Oh, I forgot to talk about this at the difficulty selection screen. There's a couple other benefits of playing on hard mode, or advanced mode as the game calls it. I'm just always going to call it hard mode, because it's basically the same thing. Anyways, there will be a couple new stage types that show up, called Covenant, Black Market, and Trial. I'll go ahead and go in here and show off the Covenant. I might not take it. So what a Covenant is a buff, but also a constriction at the same time. So here you see my max HP, or my max SP increased by 100, but invulnerable state is invalid. That obligation is extremely difficult to play around, because you can no longer just press the dodge button to avoid attacks, or use a skill with invincibility, or an attack with invincibility. It removes everything, every way of getting invulnerability or dodging attacks. And then you have to be very, very careful with airborne attack damage and ground. Just anything that says airborne damage or ground damage will be greatly reduced. You will do basically nothing with how it says. So if I use my grounded skill with this, it's going to do like single-digit damage. It is a very, very harsh reduction. So you have to be very careful when taking these. You can just kind of kill your run entirely. But at the same time, a lot of these are also very strong. Honestly, the three options here are pretty bad. The max SP isn't too bad, but the obligation is horrible for it. These will also be randomized, so it won't have the same obligation each time. If you go in there and look at it, you don't really lose out on anything. You can always just hit the back button or the cancel button, whatever that is for your controller or control method. You can always just back out without taking one. So you don't really have... there's not really that much of a risk of doing it. You can always just look at them and then back out. So to talk a little bit about Mai, he is pretty commonly considered to be the worst character, or one of the worst characters in the game. She is really not that bad, though, in my opinion. Especially if you once you kind of get an understanding of how she works. The main problem, like I mentioned before, is that once you start getting into really high entropy settings, just straight up flat out DPS becomes something that becomes way too valuable. And characters that lack that DPS end up being less... They end up being a lot less useful than characters that can easily dish out high amounts of DPS. And that's something that Mai tends to struggle with a little bit, is her damage output. With that being said, though, I don't think any character in this game is bad, or even, like, close to being unplayable, even at max entropy settings. A lot of it is just more of knowing how to pilot the character, knowing which potentials to prioritize, and then just knowing tactics as well can help out quite a bit. But there is a definite line, in my opinion, between what some characters can do compared to others, and how easily they can achieve that in terms of, like, amount of potentials it takes to start getting going. So the two big DPS options for Mai are Thousand Spears with the MP version, and Ayane Shiki with the Hold skill version. I believe the Hold skill version of Ayane Shiki does a little bit more DPS, but the benefit of the Thousand Spears is that it keeps you in invulnerability state the entire time, whereas the Ayane Shiki Hold skill does not. So at this point, I want you to take a look at my health bar, and watch what happens when I use this mixture. That was nearly a full heal. I would say it was probably about, like, half my HP bar total, based on... not quite even half, but... The healing value out of mixtures is very high with the setup that I'm running, with the mixture enhancement, and the mixture enhancement isn't even maxed out yet. Plus, I already have 5 of them from the... You start out with 1 as a base, and then you get more from the Mind Crystal that gives you more mixtures. And then you can also buy more at the shops if you manage to run out. So that's just to kind of show off what I meant about just how effective those 2 Mind Crystals are at keeping you sustained throughout the run. And this isn't just a thing that will benefit you as a new player. One of the really harsh effects that Entropy will give you is that it will cut the healing you get out of rest stages, and you do heal after you kill each boss, normally. And another thing that the entropy settings will end up cutting is that healing. So having 2 Mind Crystals that can sustain you so consistently throughout the run is something that will be very useful as a new player, as you're taking just kind of a lot of chip damage throughout the run, and then even as a veteran player who is playing on high difficulty settings, where you don't get to heal as much over the course of the run, just because of the entropy settings. It's also going to be very strong there. Did I? Okay, I actually didn't take the Thousand Spear upgrade for MP cost. I was trying to use it there a couple times and getting other inputs, and I was wondering why, but that makes sense. So one of the reasons why I recommend the airborne attack for Mai is it's one of her fastest moves, while also still dealing a very good amount of damage. Also, it will upgrade. It has a very nice upgrade, which we'll see hopefully soon. I guess I will take the tactic here. I have a lot of money saved up. Skill Shadow Spike will be an interesting one to take on my... So here's the Ayane Shiki hold skill, an example of that. You have to get into your Ayane Shiki stance, you just hold down the attack button. And then from there, you have to input different things. I would highly recommend taking Jin as a legacy passive, for the reason that you just saw there, when you're playing Mai. Honestly, I just kind of recommend always having Jin as one of your legacy passives, because his time stop is just so much of a game changer. Honestly, I kind of feel like it should have just been a base mechanic instead of being tied to a character, because it makes Jin... it just makes Jin as a legacy passive so much better than all of the other ones. The fact that his active skill freezes, and then he also has the best passive skill on top of that, is... it just makes legacy characters a little imbalanced in that sense, in my opinion. Hakumen's is really, Hakumen's active is also really good, because it gives you a free block. But other than that, the actives and passives from other characters aren't too much of a noticeable thing in gameplay, in my opinion. Lambda's can be, or Lambda's passive can be, and her active is probably one of the better ones too. Anyways, this is another type of stage you will see, Trial. Honestly, in my opinion, I've never seen a trial that I felt was worth taking, but it's up to you. How these work is that you get a debuff for 3 battles, so in this case, deduct 20% HP when not clearing a battle space perfectly, and then, as a reward, you get, for 5 battles, you're immune to the first hit in each battle. That's really not that much of a buff, in my opinion, and the debuff from it really isn't that bad either, honestly, but it's not worth the buff, in my opinion. One of the things about that, about the trial rooms, is that you need to keep in mind that the buff does not take effect until you've cleared the 3 rooms with the debuff. So sometimes it'll kind of look like the buff might offset the debuff, but you don't get to play with that buff until the debuff is already gone. That is something very important to remember. I wonder if I had that mixture less effective debuff on when I used my HP mixture. That's interesting. I don't really pay attention to my buffs and debuffs, unless I'm running, like, high entropy stuff where I'm getting debuffs constantly. So a couple of more things to talk about with Mai. Her basic skill is not very good, in my opinion. unless you can manage to use the aerial version somehow, which is hard to do because you usually end up getting too much height. I'll show off more in a second. Here we go, this is an airborne attack that I was looking for, where it sends shockwaves and attacks in a larger range. Once you get this upgrade, you're going to notice your down air attack become very powerful, especially if you combine it with one of the Ayani Shiki upgrades. Makes it where one of the attacks pulls enemies in. This will also apply to your down airs once you get the upgrades for both of them. So here again, that's another example of just the power of having extra exchange points and the shop refreshes. I'm able to get 2 potentials from the same shop, whereas it's very hard to get 2 potentials from any other type of space. You can get 2 potentials from advanced battle spaces, but that is also complete RNG. I do have no damage reward on during this run, so I am also getting a lot more extra exchange points compared to a regular run. That's just something to keep in mind too. So here we can see my down attack just becomes very ridiculous now. You can also spam it by dashing as soon as you hit the ground, and then jumping immediately and doing another down air. That's basically what I've been building my character towards this entire time. When I do, like, character showcases themselves, I'll probably take more time to go into each potential that I take. But for now, I'm trying to keep it more... I just went into an exchange space with 12 exchange points. I am a genius. But for now, I'm just trying to keep it into more basic things, but also give a little bit of an explanation of what's going on combat-wise as well. Oh, that's interesting. Ayani Shiki's dash has invincibility frames, not dodge frames. That is actually something I didn't know, because I don't think the game tells you. So here is another example of where I was using invincibility frames to just avoid the attacks there. That is her 1000 Spear attack that I talked about. I'll use it again here. Even though the attacks weren't actually hitting me, it's still a good way of taking out all those projectiles. Those red projectiles, it was kind of hard to see them since I killed them so quickly, but the red projectiles of Arakune can be destroyed by hitting them. Anyways, what I started to say is that Ayani Shiki's dash combo, which is this, I realized there that it actually has invulnerability frames. I thought it only had dodge frames, but it has both. This game is weird about... There's 2 different terms, invulnerability frames and dodge frames. Some things end up having both, but most things usually have one thing or another. Dodge frames allow you to avoid taking damage from most attacks, but there are purple exclamation mark attacks that bosses have that cannot be dodged with regular dodge frames. Those can only be dodged with invulnerability frames. Invulnerability frames also normally can't proc things like if you have a tactic that says when dodging an attack, it will, like, fire off a Shadow Spike or something like that. Invulnerability frames normally can't proc those tactics. Some things have both, so they can do both. Also, here is another one of the special stages of hard mode, or advanced mode, as the game calls it. A black market allows you to reduce your maximum HP in order to get a pretty powerful buff. So I could get a buff based on exchange points, I could get a buff based on tactics. This one, by the way, means that it means tactic in terms of your slots. So if you have an attack, if you have something in the attack slot, the skill slot, the dash slot, and so forth, it does not mean elements, it just means type in terms of which slot the skill goes, or the tactic goes to. I'm not going to reduce my HP for this run, just make things more safe for myself. You have to be very, very careful with black market upgrades when you are low on mind levels, especially if you're not taking a mind crystal that increases your HP value. If you saw my community post yesterday, I was playing a Rachel run and managed to drop my HP to something like 60. It was not a good time, I can tell you that much. I had a couple runs where I did that just for fun. I actually beat a Lambda run where I had to play with 200 HP for the final area and final boss. It was a fun time. It was a little stressful though. So let me take a break for just a second and go back into a little bit more about how Ayane Shiki works on Mai. You will have to unlock it first through the potential, and some of the effects you will also have to unlock. But anyways, you begin Ayane Shiki by holding the attack button until you see her go into this stance. After that, you will press a button. So in this case, if I hold attack and then do a regular attack, it will do the tornado again. If I hold attack and press dash, it will do this lunging move, which has invulnerability frames on it and does a decent amount of damage. You can also unlock a second hit for that. If you go into the stance and press your skill button, you will do a sort of charge attack that does a little bit of burst damage, has a little bit of range. Not the best thing in itself, but if you unlock the upgrade for it, you can hold the button down to do constant damage, which is where a lot of her DPS ends up coming from. Also, another thing, if you have the 1,000 Spheres, which I have talked about being as one of her better moves, you press down attack in a combo, and then mash it, and you will get this move where you constantly do attacks. If you have the extra potential, you can also add an MP cost to that by mashing your skill button during the 1,000 Spheres animation. The entire time that you're in that skill animation, you have invulnerability frames. So it does a lot of DPS, and it also keeps you safe the entire time. It's a very, very good tool for Mai to use. Also, something I talked about a little bit in the difficulty selection screens, but the shop prices. Here you can see that the mixture is extremely expensive. That's because I have those shop prices maxed out. So the mixtures and the HP here are increased in price. I can confirm that 50 is the normal amount for buffs. So buffs are not counted. Potentials and max MP are their same cost. So it'll just be things like removing debuffs, your HP mixtures, getting heals that are increased there. So it's not as big of a deal as it sounds like. even though I do consider being able to buy HP and mixtures as very strong if you are struggling with your runs. So keep that in mind. Shot praises are an easy way to increase your entropy increase your entropy level very quickly, but they're something that can also affect you if you're losing a lot of HP during the run. Here, I'm probably going to waste the rest of my refreshes to look for something specific, which is this. Another thing about Mai is that her fully upgraded dashes get quite good. You get the grounded version of them, you get the aerial version of them, and then once you have those unlocked, you get invulnerability during part of your dash, and you can also just use the dashes directly now. So now, instead of having that awkward thing where you kinda, you do one regular dash, and then you start doing your special dashes. It lets you chain up to 3 of them in a row, and you can also change your directions multiple times. So it's something that can be very helpful for Mai. I thought it was like the best part of her when I first originally started playing with her, and it still kind of is. It's something that she sort of has unique. Now with the updated Taukaka can kind of do the same thing, which kind of upsets me a little bit because it makes Mai have a lot less uniqueness to her. She still has her Ayane Shiki stances, which are something that only she has, but the Ayane Shiki are a little bit not impactful enough, in my opinion. When it comes to higher entropy stuff. But anyways, the problem with the dashes in high entropy is that the damage scaling from having different other attacks is just more important. You still generally do get enough potentials to get the dashes on top of your damage options, but it's something that you have to kind of prioritize later instead of sooner. I did mention it briefly before, too, but her base skill is kind of underwhelming. It does pretty good range, and the range is the best part of it, but especially as you start going into higher entropy, the damage of it really falls off a lot. The other thing is that the grounded version has a little bit of a slow startup to it. So that is something you need to keep in mind. You can kind of dash out of it, but it does have a little bit of a wind-up to it. The aerial version is much better, in my opinion, because it doesn't have that extra wind-up time. One thing you can, if you really like the throwing spears, there is a potential route where you can max those out, and it gives you a neat mechanic where you can catch the spears and throw them again for free, which also gives you a damage boost. I talk about the spear throwing being like the worst part of her kit, kind of, in my opinion, but it's also the one that I personally enjoy the most when I play a build that actually goes for them. One of the really nice things that you can get for the spear throwing, just as a one-off upgrade, is the upgrade that lets you throw them in the air. I just showed it off there. I'm actually going to go ahead and use a mixture here just to be safe. By the way, when this boss does that spinning attack and then lands on the ground, if you hit them during it, you can put them into stun state. And then this phase is not nearly as hard as it looks. It's very easy to panic during it, but especially if you have triple dash, it's not that bad. The lasers will fall. They'll target you, but then they'll hit in a delay. So a lot of times you'll see me just doing a very slow walk during part of the phases, and that will actually just avoid all of them without stacking a lot of ones on the same place or ending up in patterns that I can't dodge. And then, during the more complicated patterns, I pretty much just spam the dash key. Spamming dash with triple dash is honestly very overpowered. I think triple dash is really insane in this game. It makes it a lot easier than it could be otherwise. Okay, by the way, another tip is that I mentioned Mind Crystal that gives you extra currency when you go into, or when you clear stages. And even if you don't want to do the extra rooms of this alpha space, or omega space, I think it's called alpha, and the old one was omega. Anyways, even if you just want to go straight to Susano, if you have the crystal where you gain currency per room cleared, even stuff like these exchange spaces count. So you can go in there, even if you don't buy anything, you can just do that and get some free exchange points off of it. It's very nice. That also applies if you want to speedrun for exchange points. You can just play on low difficulty, and then take as many, just things like shops, events, that kind of thing. You can get through runs very quickly, while also still getting that, not exchange points, but AP, which you use to unlock Mind Crystals and level them up. So I really fucked up at the beginning of this fight. But you can see just how useful the HP mixtures with the Mind Crystal setups I have are. There's another case of showing just how insane triple dash is in this game. You still kinda need to time your dodges, but they're like, I don't know the exact timing of the when his counter is actually going to hit. I just kinda press the dodge button a couple times, and it usually works out, as long as I don't start dodging too insanely early. There you could see what I was talking about a little bit before with X Seal, which is her throwing spear potentials, her basic skill. Once you get all three of those, you can actually catch the spear, which you can do very quickly in midair. But that's not really, that is not something I would recommend for beginners. It's a much more difficult playstyle than going for 1000 Spear or Ayane Shiki. Really, I would put 1000 Spear as top priority for a new player, just because of the invincibility frames you get on it. Ayane Shiki is also real good with the invincibility you get on both the dashes, and then the damage output you get on the hold skill. But just remember, the hold skill version of Ayane Shiki does not have invincibility, so you will want something like Gen Passive, or Gen Legacy skill to avoid taking damage during it. So one thing I should mention is that I got a very powerful buff at the beginning of that run, which was no damage reward. It gave me a lot of extra exchange points for spending on shops. And then at the end, I also did get speedrun reward, which gave me a lot of exchange points as well. I was able to make this character a lot stronger than an average run because of having those buffs along with the shop reward, or the shop refreshes. But that is something to keep in mind. It's not really an average run, but it's also a good way to show off just how strong having the shop refreshes and the extra exchange points can be. They really start to help how much upgrades you can get during the run. They're not as much of a must-have. Like, you can see I still got a very strong run at 25 entropy there. If I was on 75, I would have been able to get a much stronger run. I probably would have been able to get even all of her potentials. But you can still get very good runs on lower entropy now, with all of the changes they've made since last time I've done a lot of my runs. And yeah, I think that will be it for this one. So the main things to think about for this video is just getting your basic starting mind crystals set up. I would really recommend these ones: increased max HP, HP mixtures, and HP mixtures recovering extra to you, because it's something I feel like is going to be more useful as a new player than stacking damage or something. It's going to give you more opportunities to practice things before you end up dying. Also, these things are going to be very, very useful in even the late stages of playing the game, since a lot of the entropy settings make you take a lot more damage, while also reducing the amount of healing you get out of other sources of healing. So these are going to be very good for early stages, as well as the entire time you're playing. Mixture enhancement, mixture replenishment, and blooming vigor is always going to continue to be a very good source of HP increase for you, even when you're at max mind levels. When you're at max mind levels, it's not nearly as important, but it can still be pretty powerful during then. Potential discovery is also something that I find one of the better ones to max out right away. Though, as I said before, you need to have a good understanding of your character before you can start using this one efficiently. So, if you're a brand new player, especially if you like to play a lot of different characters instead of one different character, that can be something that you put off later. Also, max this one as soon as possible, and I would recommend using it as much as possible. We will go over more advanced mind crystals in the next episode, probably, as I unlock more slots for them. But if you do want to go ahead and look at more before then, I added a section to my Google Sheets where it has the recommended mind crystals for early game, mid game, and late game. There will be a link to all of my guides, and then you will click on the one. It just says like builds, info, and other stuff, and it's a Google Sheets. So you can find that if you want to go ahead and look ahead for mind crystals that way. Anyways, that'll be it for this one. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.